This is the world of Salesforce and Dropbox, HubSpot and Evernote, a world unthinkable without cloud software services. Most businesses and consumers use SaaS every day to get work done. Driven by the internet and ever-expanding availability of bandwidth, SaaS has come to dominate our lives in a very short span of time. But developing a defining service, often ahead of its time, getting users to engage, secure funding, protect IP, and building a truly remarkable and successful SaaS is not an easy task. SaaS Stories brings conversations with the dreamers and visionaries who dared to think ahead. How they built their SaaS, genesis, struggles, trials, tribulations, and eventually success. Welcome to SaaS Stories. Thank you for your time and for joining us on this session. I have a favor to ask. While you continue to listen to the podcast, please leave a comment or rating at iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I personally look at each comment and will give a shout out to each of you in our next episodes. It means a lot to hear from you. Welcome to this exciting new episode of SaaS Stories. Today we have with us Shruti Kapoor, CEO and founder of Wingman, a SaaS application that assists, audits and analyzes every sales call through an AI engine and serve real-time insights on how your sales reps can improve their performance.
Wingman is a software for salespeople that analyzes sales calls. Even though people record sales calls today, they don't have the time and energy to go back and listen to every call. And two, there is a lot of value, not just for sales teams, but also for product and marketing and general management to understand what customers are saying in sales calls. So that's how we started out. And what we realized during the conversations was managers actually were interested in using those insights for training salespeople. Through that process, what we realized was that, okay, everybody is interested in these insights to help coach their team and make it better. But 6 months after we deployed the product with different customers, we realized people were not actually using it for coaching. And we went back and asked them, hey, what happened? We don't see any improvement. And they said, honestly, we don't have the time. We think we will do this. It's something that we want to do because we know that's the right thing to do, but we don't land up doing it as often. And so what we decided was that maybe we wanted to build a way to remind them when they're making that mistake that they should be doing this or not doing that. So what the product evolved into was to not just have an analytics piece, but also a real-time feedback mechanism.
Shruti is the founder CEO of Wingman, a real-time sales coaching tool that's powered by AI to deliver insights to sales reps during sales calls. Before starting Wingman, Shruti spent a decade in the finance and tech world, but her teenage passion was in life sciences and studying diseases. Outside of work, she enjoys playing board games while doing karate chops to keep her 4-year-old from disrupting the boards. Now, on to this data-rich episode with Shruti Kapoor. Shruti, welcome to SaaS Stories. I'm really delighted to talk to you.
Thanks so much, Jen. Honor to be here.
You're most welcome. Tell me a bit about how you came about, your background, how you came into SaaS, how you met your co-founder, your Y Combinator story, a little bit of the backstory.
Sure. If I were to go very back, you will realize that I'm actually trained as a life scientist. And with the whole COVID outbreak, I've actually been reading up a lot more about life sciences than I have in the last decade or so. But to cut to more recent times, did my MBA, worked in the financial sector for 10 years. And at the fag end of that decade, was working at a fintech company called Payoneer, where I got exposed to sales. It's funny that it took me more than 10 years to actually get directly exposed to sales, even though pretty much everything in corporate world is about selling, but this was directly on the front line. And through that experience, what I realized was that sales was definitely interesting, and it was very hard to break it down into whether it was an art or a science. And as somebody who's deeply passionate about technology and about science, I felt that there could be a lot more science in sales. And that's kind of what got me started on Wingman, because I thought that there wasn't enough science in sales being used back then. And I'm looking forward to changing that with Wingman.
That's a nice angle. Tell me how you met your co-founder and how did Wingman actually come about?
Sure. So, I'd been working in sales, and there had been a few things that I'd been finding challenging. And at the same time, I'd been thinking about starting up for quite a while. And I think that, sometimes it's very hard to quantify why you wanted to start something, because I think sometimes it's just an itch to say that I want to do something on my own. And for me, it was just that I felt I would feel a lot more alive if I was, fully responsible for something. And so I knew that somewhere down the line I would want to start up. And so I'd been, telling my friends about this. And one of my co-founders was a classmate of a close friend of mine from undergrad. So, they were classmates in IIT, and this friend and I were classmates in IIM. And, he introduced us because this co-founder was actually moving back from the US to India solely with the intention of, I want to start something. I don't know what it is, but I know that I want to start something. And so it kind of felt like a great timing. We immediately connected, even though when we first met, we had no idea what we wanted to start up on. Right. So we just met in a coffee day, chatted about everything, just got to know each other. And we felt that, the energy kind of resonated. Of course, having a common friend who we both knew very well and trusted helped. And that's, that led to many more discussions, many more coffee shops. And then, we had actually three co-founders, and the third co-founder, Shrikar and Murli were, really close friends that spent, nearly a decade in the US together. And Murli then motivated Shrikar to also move back and said, if you ever wanted to start up, this is the time, let's do this. So it was actually quite a lot of things falling into place because, moving lock, stock, and barrel across continents with a family and a kid is not trivial. But it was just to show that everybody was dedicated to the cause. Everybody kind of really wanted to do this. Even though we didn't know what we wanted to do, we knew that we wanted to do something of our own.
So how did Wingman and Y Combinator happen?
So, so we started up in May of 2018. And when we started up, we, because we had already, all of us had been working for more than 10 years. We had a network of people that we could, call upon when it came to funding and reaching out to investors, etc. So, of course, when we started out, we went down the path of saying, let's try and get the team together, because we knew that this was also a fairly technically complex product to build. So we wanted to make sure that we kind of put in the right things into play. And because Murli and Shrikar had been in the Valley, and both of them, of course, knew about Y Combinator very well, somewhere in the back of our mind, we thought, okay, we should apply for this. So we applied for it like the first time when we were still kind of thinking about the idea, back in 2018. And at that point, we didn't make it to the final round. And then, a year later, we were just kind of wondering, should we apply? Should we not apply? Is this the right time? And also there is the whole, what happens if we get through? Because we all have families, and then, you have to go and spend like 3 months in the US. And we said, literally like the deadline was tomorrow. And we said, okay, let's just do it. And we did that. And then, of course, it's like a 3-step process. So we did the online application. We got a call for the interview. And we really then started thinking about preparing for the interview. The tricky thing with the Y Combinator interview is that it's only a 10-minute interview. So you have like all these big ideas about your company, everything that you want to talk about, but you only have 10 minutes. So it's like the hardest part is to figure out what is really important to say and what is not, and to make sure that your thoughts are so crystal clear that you can communicate them briefly. So actually that process in itself of preparing for the interview was so valuable that pretty much the day we finished the interview, we came out saying, what, it doesn't matter whether or not we get through, because we've already gotten so much value out of this, because we kind of just went back and like became so much more focused on what the business wanted to do in the next 6 months. What did we think our competitive advantage was? And I think all of that really helped us. But as it turned out, we did get through, and I was actually already on a flight from India to the US for a conference. And, I was transiting in Frankfurt when I learned that we had gotten through. And, after the 10 seconds of elation, I was like, oh shit, now I have to travel to the US, spend 2 weeks there, travel back to India, and then go back to the US for 3 months. And I was like, oh my God, the logistics seems like a nightmare. Leaving the family behind seems like a nightmare. But yeah, all of that happened, and here we are on the other side. It was a great experience for us. I think for a lot of people, like I've actually not spent any time in the Silicon Valley. I've only been there like a couple of times till now. Spending those 3 months, being in the midst of great people like Paul Graham, just doing the circuit on Sand Hill Road, meeting all the different types of investors. It was fantastic. It was definitely like living on the Silicon Valley shore, or like reading a book about Silicon Valley.
So, what are the highlights? So, do you have any things to share from your, say, encounters with Paul Graham or any of the other Y Combinator folks, or what was your sort of vibe that you got as Indians out of India who have got into Y Combinator trying to beat the path in Sand Hill Road?
Beat the path in Sand Hill Road is a hard one to do. But I think like what was really interesting was that and I see this trend just starting in India. But in general, in India, people are scared to talk about failures, right? And that was the biggest takeaway for us, because week after week, and the format for Y Combinator is pretty straightforward. Every week they call in a founder who shares their story and their learnings in that process. And each of them is supposed to be really candid. It's supposed to be, self-deprecating in some manner, not like it's forced upon them, but everybody has failures in their journey to startups, right? And I think that that was a refreshing change for us. Like we got to hear from Justin Khan, one of the founders of Twitch, who then talked about his own mental health challenges through that process. After that process, being a successful ex-founder is apparently equally hard. And then like he was trying to then, start up again, Atrium, and unfortunately Atrium actually just shut down a few months back. So like just listening to his entire journey, I thought that was like quite a highlight for me. Also because I'd read so much about Justin Khan and like heard about him in so many different places. So that was definitely one of the highlights. And I think, so Paul Graham actually was there helping people prepare for their demo day pitches before demo day, like for a week. And it was so fascinating because, he was just so on point. Like, it's amazing how a lot of those partners come in and, they'll listen to you for 2 minutes and they can probably tell you more about your business than people who, you have spoken to for 2 hours. So it's just so amazing that they have such a keen acumen for startups and they know what the common failure points are. If somebody's saying something, what is it that they're trying to not say? It's amazing.
Interesting. And what about Sand Hill Road?
So yeah, I mean, there have been stories of so what happens is, you have demo day, which is set up on a particular day, and like roughly a week or 2 weeks before that is when we started taking meetings with investors, because till then we wanted to just focus on selling to more customers and building the business. And there were definitely days where like me and my co-founders had to split up and say, you go and meet that investor and I'll go and meet that investor, and like go and look in coffee shops and say, I think I recognize this face, and then check on LinkedIn saying, oh, this is this investor, and let me overhear what he's talking to the other founders. It's funny, like all those things that you hear about, and like the offices are really posh. So like I remember I went to this office of Trinity Ventures, and they have like literally full wall portraits of every person who works there. With some like fancy caricaturish thing done to it and stuff. Like it's all very plush offices. Unfortunately, one thing that doesn't change is poor phone connectivity and reception. So like sometimes I would be waiting for one meeting at an investor's office and on a Zoom call with another investor, and like connectivity was still a struggle. So
interesting. When you started with your ideas and your plan at Y Combinator, and you came out and you came back to India, what were your plans and how far have they panned out by now?
Yeah, so we actually, as part of every business that is starting up, one of the important things that they think that they're thinking about is the name of the company, right? Which is probably the least important because nobody cares about it.
Tell me.
So, course, after many coffee shop discussions, we came up with what we thought was a brilliant name. It was Strings.ai. And, all three of us are a little bit geeky, even though I'm, somewhat the least geeky of the lot. And we felt that since we are doing something with voice and sound and also analytics, so we thought strings, kind of depicted sound, but also strings as regular expressions and, analytics and stuff. So we thought, it was a really smart name. We got the domain strings.ai and we went down that path. But actually what happened like a year later, and that was around the time when we went through Y Combinator, we had realized that what we wanted to build in the product, and maybe I'll just say one line about what Wingman does, is that Wingman is a software for salespeople and that analyzes sales calls, right? So that's how we started saying, listen, even though people record sales calls today, they don't have the time and energy to go back and listen to every call. And two, there is a lot of value, not just for sales teams, but also for product and marketing and general management to understand what customers are saying in sales calls. So if we can, showcase those trends, there can be a lot of value for businesses. So that's how we started out. And what we realized during the conversations was managers actually were interested in using those insights for training salespeople. So what they would want to do is they would very quickly say, oh, if you're analyzing all my calls, what I want to know is, my sales reps A and B are top performers. My sales reps Y and Z are not doing so well. What are the differences and what can I tell Y and Z to make them a little bit better? So through that process, what we realized was that, okay, everybody is interested in these insights to help coach their team and make it better. But 6 months after, we deployed the product with different customers, we realized people were not actually using it for coaching. And we went back and asked them, hey, what happened? We don't see any improvement. And they said, honestly, we don't have the time. We think we will do this. It's something that we want to do because we know that's the right thing to do, but we don't end up doing it as often. And so what we decided was that maybe we wanted to build a way for managers to say, you know what, I know that I want all my team to do this, but can you have an automatic way to remind them when they're making that mistake that they should be doing this or not doing that? All right. So what the product evolved into was to not just have an analytics piece, but also a real-time feedback mechanism. And when we started doing this real-time prompts and cues, what we thought was that we needed a separate name for this. And so we kind of brainstormed and said, what is a good proxy for somebody who's helping you when you're trying to have a conversation? And Wingman seemed like a great name. So that's how the name Wingman came about. And so for a while, we had a company name, which was Strings.ai. And then we had one part of our product, which was called Wingman. And then when we went through the Y Combinator journey, people kept asking us, so what is Strings and what is Wingman? And the advice we got was, listen, you're too young to have two different names and identities. Just pick one and run with it. So that's how we kind of landed up rebranding the company and changing the name and all of that.
Nice. I would like to focus on 3 areas where I would like to learn about your experience and what you have taken from the experiments that you have run yourself, right? So you have gone into each of these areas with some assumptions, and then you have sort of validated them or crossed them out and saying, okay, this works and this doesn't. So the 3 areas being team building and culture, and we can possibly touch that towards the end because it's not a very large company, but I would like to talk about that. The second one is obvious, raising funds. What were your assumptions? What have you done? What have you learned? And to my mind, the most critical is customers. How do you get customers? How did you plan to get customers? How did those pan out? What is working? What is not working? So let's go with the last one first. What were your assumptions when you started building the product? And obviously Y Combinator means you have by default gone out and spoken to prospects even before you are building the product, and that rigor is wonderful. What did you learn? What did you see? And how has that sort of panned out over the last 12 months or so?
So yes, we did start out with speaking to customers, and the first thing that we knew was, okay, we wanted to maybe build something that would analyze conversations for sales teams. And so we went and started speaking to people that we could reach out through our network, right? This was in the pre-product stage where we just wanted initial validation and, more detailing. And so we spoke to sales managers in India, and we must have had close to 20 conversations. But then as we started building the product, what we realized was that we only wanted to build it for English to begin with. And in India, even if people tell you that, English is the primary language, what they mean is that 100% of all conversations have 80% English, right? It's not that 80% of conversations have 100% English. So for us, that was a stark difference, which is that we couldn't fully analyze calls for customers that were selling into India, even if they were selling like B2B products or SEC type of products to high net worth individuals. And sometime like almost 6 months after we started the company, we realized that we needed to go back and speak to people that we actually wanted to sell to, which was the English speaking market, and primarily being the US. And so at that point, we consciously, decided to actually just get on a plane and set up as many meetings as we could to do that initial interviews with potential target customers. And the idea was to go in with the expectation of just asking them for feedback. And where possible, speaking to people who had been using other products in the space to better understand what problems they were able to solve and what problems they were not able to solve, and to see what we could do better. Right. So I think that was super critical for us and super helpful.
So timeline was, where are you at this point? Timeline wise, when did you decide to go to the US?
So we started the company in May 2018. In December 2018, we went to the US the first time to just meet with customers.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And we could have at that stage found like a million reasons to not fly to the US, right? And say that we can do these interviews or we can, figure things out. And honestly, we don't have a network in the US, right? So I've never lived in the US. Even though my co-founders have lived in the US, they were not from the sales line. So they don't really know salespeople. And if you go to the US and, it's maybe being a bit racist, but not really, what you'll find interestingly is that brown people in general are massively underrepresented in the sales community, right? You'll find them as great techies, but you will not find them as people who are doing sales. And so very quickly, what we realized was we had to go and establish that network. And so we then started finding points that could help us connect with people in the US. At that point, we had the first version of our product. And we had 2 customers in India who were using our product. Both of these 2 customers, while they were in India, they were selling to their market in the US, right? So they were pre-qualified to only have conversations in English, right? So that was where we were when we decided to take the leap of faith and travel to the US to do these interviews. And the way we then set out to set up meetings was to literally find anyone through our network who could connect us with anyone who was relevant to us, right? So we did a combination of, trying to get introduced to people. So we would find a few people who were good connectors. We would literally go through all of their LinkedIn profile and see who were the few people, that fit our target audience that they could connect us with. Along the way, by then, we had met a few people who were excited by the idea, who were willing to support us as angel investors, and also as just mentors and, generally people who were like friends of Wingman by now. And so they helped us set up some of the meetings. And some of the meetings we actually set up by just doing massive cold outreaches. So we would try to identify people that we wanted to connect with, and we would reach out to them on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm going to be in the Bay Area. Would you be okay to meet me for coffee? So we did that. And that trip wasn't so much to do sales, right? It was just to understand whether we were on the right track and what we should really be building. And more importantly, and one thing that people often miss out is, I know what I want to build, but it's important to understand how your customers are describing that problem so that you can then use also the right language to pitch the product to them.
Correct.
Right. So a lot of these conversations helped us in formulating that messaging. And so we came back And in January of 2019 is when we started working on building the real-time bot, which helps with real-time suggestions, which initially we named Wingman, and now the whole company is called Wingman. And our first few customers, to go back to that question, they came, at that point, they came from either our network or through our investors' network. And at that point, we were sure that we wanted to start reaching out to customers directly in the US. So that trip also gave us the confidence and the messaging to then start doing more scaled up, what is still pretty small scale, but much more scaled up than before, outreaches to potential target customers in the US. And that's how we, once we got a first customer that came purely through a cold email outreach, we kind of knew that we were heading in the right direction, and we could, then start selling to people we didn't know, which I think is a big leap.
It's time for a short break. I asked Shruti what her sales outreach program looked like. Besides mining databases like Sales Navigator and the likes, what is working for a team to identify and then sell to prospects? Shruti shares the process along with a vital point that most sales folks miss out while identifying prospects. Stay with us.
You are listening to a Business Podcast Network original. Podcasting is the fastest growing content marketing opportunity which is untapped. We can help you craft your audio strategy and help leverage the wide reach and easy streaming capability that the smartphone penetration provides. It is easy, it is powerful and personal. Talk to us to find out how podcasting can help you build your brand and reach out to your targets like never before. Write to us at bpn@bizcast.in. That is bpn@bizcast.in. Business Podcast Network. Podcasts end to end.
Welcome back. I'm Shubhanjan, your host for SaaS Stories and founder of PitchLink. Right before the break, I asked Shruti what her sales outreach process looked like. Shruti goes into the details and also shares a vital clue of what reps are missing out on. Cold outreach works how? I mean, you are going and, for example, sort of figuring out in Sales Navigator, you are saying, okay, these are the kind of profile, these are the kind of companies, this kind of size, this kind of number of employees, how do you go about that?
Yeah, so there are different things in when you're reaching out to people that you need to think about who to reach out to, right? And I think that sometimes the mistake people make is they think of who they should reach out to based on the filters they can create, either on LinkedIn or some other place. But broadly speaking, there are two things that you need to answer, right? One is, who do I want to reach out to? And two is, when do I want to reach out to them, right? So the who do I want to reach out to could be, the industry segment, the size of the company, etc. When do I want to reach out to them could be a trigger that is very specific to you. So maybe I want to reach out to them when, they've hired for this particular position, right? Or maybe I want to reach out to them when they have adopted this particular technology. Or when, they have raised funding or something, right? So very often people miss out the second part, which is the when, right? Because it is a combination of reaching out to the person at the time when they're willing to listen to your message. Right? So think about somebody trying to sell you a burger when you've just finished having your meal. It doesn't matter how delicious that burger looks, and it doesn't matter how great that messaging is. You're not going to be able to eat that burger, so you're not going to buy it then.
Right. So what kind of tools do you use to sort of collect this intents or this signal? So obviously you're talking of the signal. It could be intent based or action based or whatever. What are you using to sort of understand that, yes, this is the time that I need to reach out to X?
Yeah. So of course, the who is the easier part, right? The intent signals, like you said, vary a little bit, right? So we initially thought that we wanted to reach out to people who had just raised funding, right? And maybe, like a Series B funding and a particular sizing, etc. At which point there are databases like Crunchbase or Traction, right? That you can use to get that information. then we thought that there were also some signals for people who had just hired for a particular role, right? So we would then go to places like ZipRecruiter and Indeed.com, and we would find out the list. In this region, this role, are there job listings, right? And if I think that they might have hired for this job listing, I would actually look for older listings. So I would say, show me listings that are, maybe 3 to 6 months old or whatever. Right. And now there are, of course, tools that also combine a lot of that intent data, right? So there is Slintlel, there's Easy Leads, there's like a bunch of tools that also try to give you some of this intent data. And then there is some intent data, which is just the customer coming out and saying, hey, I'm looking for this, right? Which is things that you can get from being on forums, being active on social media. So it's a combination of all of those.
Okay. And till now, have you seen any major variance in the folks that you originally thought would be your customers, and you then figured, no, they are not? Can you narrate any of that kind of experience?
So we've definitely experimented with segments, right? So one of the segments that I initially thought might be a good customer segment for us was real estate, because I thought that, while they're B2C, it's a complex sales. There's going to be multiple times you have to contact the buyer. And it's a high value enough sale that, people would be interested in understanding what's going right, what's going wrong. And it's not purely mechanical. So I thought that was a good segment. What I realized and why we are not going after that segment actively is that in most cases, or at least in a majority of the cases, the real estate agents are not on their desk making these calls. They could be anywhere in the field, they're on their phone. And so a lot of calls are actually happening directly from mobiles, and they are not necessarily also the most tech savvy segment, right? A lot of realtors in the US, you'll find, are people who are like building a second income stream after retirement, or, after kids go to college, etc. So they're kind of in the 50 plus age group. They're not necessarily the most happy about using new technology. And so we realized that maybe that's not a segment to go after. And the way we discovered that was, so initially we thought, okay, theoretically this seems like a good segment. I was going to be in the US around the time there was a big real estate conference that was happening. So I said, let me go and just spend time there. And I think, of course, part of it was having conversations with the people who were there. But literally, if I had just sat on a desk and watched the demographics of the people who were showing up, and maybe looked at a few of them using their phones, I would have realized that this wasn't going to be a good segment. So there are sometimes not easy substitutes to being there in person, right? And I think with the COVID, that's going to be a little bit harder, especially for people like us who are trying to learn quickly about their segment. And events, are a great point of, quickly understanding and learning and having many conversations in person.
Right. When you started the year with all this behind you in terms of all this experience and all these successes that you have had in terms of figuring out what's working, what's not, and so on, and you had some sort of target to meet end of the year, where do you stand with that, and what's your current goal for this financial year end, or whatever calendar year, whichever way you're working?
We are still in the pre-product market fit stage. And I think while it is tempting to go out there and put targets, and it sounds like it'll be motivating to have a bold number on the roadmap, the honesty of it is that in the pre-product market fit stage, you're in the pre-product market fit stage because you don't have repeatability. You don't know what is working, or what is the formula, and what do you want to scale up. And so you can throw any number, and it's like throwing a dart on the dartboard, right? It could land anywhere. So, it's kind of hard for me to say how this has changed our life, right? One thing we know for sure is that it has changed the life of our customers, right? And we sell to sales teams. and sales teams are the first ones impacted in downsizing, right? So we are seeing lots of layoffs left, right, and center to people that we reach out to. So definitely, I would say that the projections have probably been cut by half. Uh, but again, like for us, we're somewhat fortunate because we raised funding last quarter of last year. We have good runway in front of us. And we are still at the stage where we wanted to experiment with different things. So maybe there are some experiments that we wanted to run pre-COVID that don't make sense for us to run right now, given the way certain industries and budgets are. But there's definitely a lot of new experiments that we can run today. So it's been interesting. And for us, the other interesting thing has been that we've seen across the hundreds of sales reps who use the product, the usage of Wingman has doubled during this period because it's just so important to help people stay on the same page. So we're also seeing some good tailwinds. So yeah, it's a mixed bag.
Interesting. But you will basically still remain focused on cold outreach and conversion from there.
Yes. So for us, this has also given us, from a sales and marketing strategy standpoint, just some time to actually invest in things like, building trust, building brand, building testimonials, doing more work on the website. Also, because this is a stressful time and teams are struggling on different things, we're also trying to create resources jointly with other experts that can help sales teams. So we published an ebook. We are doing a joint webinar on the mental health impact on sales with Freshworks. And so there's a lot of other things that we are trying to do to also just get much closer to the community that we want to serve, which is salespeople.
Wonderful. So this you said that you raised funding. So my next focus area, as we discussed, was to talk about your experience in raising funds. Was it post Y Combinator? Whatever Y Combinator did, this round was separate from Y Combinator funding.
So this round that I mentioned was just post Y Combinator. So that was part of the demo day build up. We had actually been speaking to investors very early on in our journey, like I said, back in 2018. But given how long and how painful it is to set up a company with a India-US structure and all the complexities of it, we actually only managed to get the company set up in like March last year. And so we hadn't, of course, taken any money till then. And then, Y Combinator came around. And so we kind of, whatever money we raised at that point was when we already were in the Y Combinator program and we knew that, we were going to go through the demo day. So our fundraise experience in that sense became much easier because, of course, FOMO is the biggest thing that can help anybody raise funds. And Y Combinator is one of the easiest ways to create FOMO.
So how much did you raise? How much did Y Combinator invest, and how much did the other people invest in the last round that you raised?
So Y Combinator has standard terms. They invest $150,000 in every company that they take into the batch for a standard equity that they take.
It's like 8% or something, right?
7%.
7%, yeah.
We totally raised $2.3 million.
Okay. So this came from investors in the US or in India?
Both, mixed.
Okay, and these are all institutional investors? Were you calling it a Series A or seed, or what were you calling it?
So this is very much a seed round. There are a few angel investors as well, and of course, majority of the money is from institutional investors.
Okay. So you say that because you started talking to investors early into your journey, it helped you to, and Y Combinator sort of created the FOMO. So it basically aided your cause, right? Y Combinator itself. What is your learning? Because this is a substantial round, and it's not. I cannot name many Indian companies who are in your stage who would have been able to pull off $2.3 million of funding. And what kind of dilution did you have to go through for that?
So I can't disclose those exact numbers.
Hmm. Okay.
But for us,
Roundabout. I mean, it's 1/3, 1/4.
so it's less than a fourth.
Less than 1/4.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yes.
So for us, what I think helped was, of course, I mean, like one being FOMO, right? But a lot of the investors that we spoke to during Y Combinator or just, before demo day, and people who were quick enough to give us term sheets when we had a deadline that we wanted to meet, right? So the great thing about demo day is not just that it creates FOMO, but there's also a deadline in play, right? So everybody knows that I need to line up before that particular date. And the sooner I can do that, the better it is if there's competitive forces at play. So for us, what also helped us was the fact that we had started speaking to investors early on, right? So through the journey, these were people who already knew us. They had met us a few times. They kind of therefore trusted us, had built a relationship with the founders, and were able to make those decisions much sooner. Right. So I think that one thing that is always tricky, and I don't think I have the right answer for it today, is should I meet investors only when I'm raising money, or should I keep meeting investors all the time? I think there is a delicate balance, because if you're meeting investors all the time, it can get very distracting. And if you're meeting investors only when you want to raise money, they're going to find it hard to make that decision so quickly. Right? If they've only known you for a week or for 2 weeks, it's much harder for them. So I think that the right answer is to identify a few people that you want to build relationships with, and keep in touch with them maybe once every 3 months or once every 6 months. But then when you actually need the funding, they would feel that they already know you, that they can already trust you, and it'll be much faster when you need to.
So when you try to identify prospective investors, did the investments come from that pool, or were there some new people who came in? So how many investors do you have right now? I'm not talking of the angels, but 2.
Right. So on the institutional, actually on the institutional side itself, we have 4 investors.
Okay.
But some of them are like angel-sized checks that
Okay.
we maybe took for some other strategic reasons, etc.
Okay.
But the good thing was also the structure in which we raised money. It's called a SAFE, right? So what it means is that we don't need to close everything at one go, right?
Especially the valuation.
But like the paperwork as well, right? So what happens otherwise is, if I'm doing a prize round and I want to raise money from these 3 investors, I need to make sure that all 3 of them are lined up, agree to the same terms, sign on that same sheet of paper, and wire the money to me at the same time, roughly. But in the case of SAFE, I meet you, you like the company, you like the terms, you can, literally wire the money to me and sign on that standalone paper. I meet someone tomorrow, he or she can sign on their own separate sheet of paper and send me the money. And you don't have to care about the person who's coming after you or before you.
So did you zero in on SAFE on your own, or did somebody advise you that look at SAFE as an instrument?
So Y Combinator today only does SAFEs,
Right.
and so that is how we got introduced to that structure. In India, most investors are not yet comfortable doing a SAFE.
Yeah.
But of course, since we were going through Y Combinator and we said this is the instrument we are going to use, people were okay to do it.
So coming finally to the team and culture, what kind of a culture are you trying to build as a company, and why is it important for you?
Yeah, so I think we think about this a lot, and some of the things that happened, and now I can claim that these were our strokes of genius, happened by chance. What we realized was that all of our first 3-4 employees that we hired had been entrepreneurs, right? So they tried to do something on their own, and when they came in, they were joining us, taking a significant risk, but very clearly with the intent that, listen, I want to be an entrepreneur, and this is a way for me to be an entrepreneur. Right? This is not just a step for me to be an entrepreneur. This is a way for me to be an entrepreneur. And that's kind of the culture that we want to instill. A culture of, one, bringing in people who want to take ownership, not just of what they are doing, but of everything else that's happening around them. And so it's not like our engineers are only sitting there and coding. They are equally interested in what marketing campaign are we running, how are we doing customer success, and vice versa. So you kind of, I think that was, in some sense, a lucky stroke. But I think the other thing that we've realized is the reason why we all quit our jobs and started doing this, right, was because we felt that we would be a lot more productive if we were doing something where we could feel ownership, right? And so that's what we kind of wanted to create for the other people. So I think that's kind of the fundamental underlying principle for culture. And of course, I think in today's context, culture becomes harder because of work from home and remote. And what we've tried to do consciously is to make sure that we're not just doing like things where people are seeing each other or doing daily stand-ups, but we also make it a point to, just do like there is a open slot every afternoon where people join if they want to and just chit chat with each other like they would around the water cooler. And in some of those sessions, we do like meme making competitions where people are making memes on each other and, just having fun. And what we've realized is that everybody who's there is there not just to learn from us or to build a company, but also because they all like to work with other smart people and they want to be able to learn from other smart people. So the other responsibility we feel is for us to create platforms that allow people to do that. So before COVID struck, we were doing a book club every week where, somebody would come in and talk about a book that they had read and, why would they recommend it to others. We've now changed that a little bit and we are doing what we call a show and tell, where every week one person can come and talk about anything that they find fascinating, right? And there is absolutely no, what is allowed, what is not allowed. We've had everything from talking about psychedelics to talking about poetry and talking about CRISPR and vaccination and everything. So I think, that's the other culture, which is, can you bring smart people and help them feel that they're still growing and evolving and learning?
Absolutely. So before I let you go, one quick question on the ownership point. Are you sort of looking at a well-defined ESOP program so that the ownership is not only in terms of responsibility, but also in terms of owning a piece of the company? And how easy are you finding it trying to sort of administer it in India?
Yeah, so we have a well-structured ESOP program. And in fact, one of the things that we do is when we make people an offer, we also give them the choice of choosing, trading or doing a trade-off between the cash and the ESOP.
Okay.
Right. And so it also kind of gives them a sense of designing their own compensation.
So how is it working? So how many people you have now?
We are 9 people right now.
9. And how many of them have, leaving the 3 of you out? So
everybody has ESOPs.
Everybody has, no, and how was my question was more about how did you see people making the choice in terms of how much ESOP I want vis-a-vis how much cash I want? Do you see any pattern there?
So in pretty much all of the cases till now, people have chosen the higher ESOPs and lower cash component, which initially shocked us, and later we realized that's a good signal.
Of course.
SaaS Stories is brought to you by PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. PitchLink enables high-quality interactions between buyers and sellers through presentation and discussion modules. Sellers create personalized sales presentations and reach out to prospects through a non-intrusive, buyer-qualified engagement. PitchLink requires no installation or download and holds the entire repository of sales collaterals and buyer-seller conversation. Talk to us to know more about how you can engage with customers without intrusion. Call us on 990-216-3132. That is 990-216-3132.
Shruti, it was wonderful chatting with you, and thank you for being open and sharing. And I'm sure we'll talk again sometime soon as things happen. Keep flagging us so that we can sort of take your learning and share it with folks who are interested in learning.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Suvanjan.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Coming up in the next episode is another in-depth and data-rich conversation with Ravi Trivedi, founder Push Engage, which was recently acquired by Awesome Motive.
Push Engage is the leading web push notification platform serving customers in 150 countries. We are a global player. Last month, we sent around 9 billion web push notifications. So we are well known. We are among the leading players in the space. The problem that we are solving for the customer is I have a site and people come to my site one time, but they don't come back. That's the fundamental problem we are solving, which is an engagement, or you can say it's a re-engagement problem. You can go and check your Google Analytics. Maybe you get 20% repeat visitor or 30 if you're lucky, right? But all you want to do is, because it's very costly to get the first visit, can you get them to come back? The point I will make is, and this we have done a lot of work on with some numbers, is to see that how does web push compare to email? And when you send out an email to 100 people, we saw maybe 5 people or 10 people. Maybe if you are good mass mailer, 15, 20 people will open. That's like the average MailChimp open rate. On the web push, the same open rate was 50 to 70%.
We have a fantastic lineup over the next couple of episodes with great conversations featuring Jagat Iyer, founder Witphone, and many more. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you do not miss a single episode. Thanks for listening. Thank you for being with us today and listening to this episode of SaaS Stories. This is where I speak with the dreamers and visionaries who dared to think ahead and build world-class SaaS products. We hope this conversation helped you with the insights that you can go and apply right now to your own SaaS journey. We hope to have you here with us again in the next episode of SaaS Stories. SaaS Stories is brought to you by PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. SaaS Insider, the definitive community for global SaaS, and is a BizCast original production.